Welcome to BioAP, the only show where AP biology actually makes sense, because we break it down in a way that everybody can understand. Today, we will be exploring that power that lies within every life form. Do you have any idea what that is? If you guessed nuclear fission, you're absolutely wrong. That is ATP, adenosine triphosphate, to all you acronym lovers. Let's go!
In between the lines, there's a lot of obscurity. I'm not inclined to resign to maturity. If it's alright, then you're all wrong. Why bounce around to the same damn song? You'd rather run when you can't crawl. I know, you know that I'm not telling the truth. I know, you know that you're...
Every living thing requires ATP to perform its basic functions. Imagine you're a car. The car can do some pretty cool things, but it can't do it without gasoline to fuel the engine and electricity to power the battery. Now, without ATP, your cells wouldn't be able to create proteins, move, or shift molecules against the gradient into and out of the cells. In other words, without ATP, you're dead. So how do we get ATP? Like a car, an organism cannot create its own fuel out of nothing. Even a plant, which can absorb sunlight, can't use that energy directly as ATP. The step in between the creation or ingestion of food and the creation of ATP is called cellular respiration, the process by which glucose is broken down to create ATP. Now, there are two types of respiration. The first is anaerobic respiration, which occurs mostly in bacteria, yeast, and muscle cells. In anaerobic respiration, glucose is broken down to yield a lot of byproduct, usually lactic acid or ethanol, and a very small amount of ATP. This is done without oxygen and without a mitochondria. This is also called fermentation, which occurs in the cytosol of the cell. The other is called aerobic respiration. Now, we'll be breaking down the steps to aerobic respiration later, but first, let's take a look at the formula. Now, what does all this mean? Glucose plus oxygen yields water, carbon dioxide, and ATP. How's this done? Well, let's find out. In order to demonstrate the movement of glucose in a cell during aerobic respiration, I found the best and most convenient place to represent it. See this? This will represent the mitochondria of our cell. Mitochondria is the membrane-bound organelle where most of respiration takes place. But where it begins is here, in the cytosol of our cell.
I don't know about you, but I thought it was clever.
The first process of cellular respiration is called glycolysis. Glycolysis is said to be the first cellular process to evolve. Why? Because every life form on Earth does it. Now, just for start, glucose enters the cytosol through the cell membrane. And in the cytosol, it splits in half into two pyruvate molecules. During this split, ATP is released through substrate-level phosphorylation.
Wait, what was that?
That's just a fancy term meaning that the phosphate group that was used to phosphorylate the ADP into ATP came from an organic substance. Now, in glycolysis takes 2 ATP to start, so even though 4 ATP is created, there's only a net gain of 2 ADP. As pyruvate works its way towards the mitochondrion, it must first transform into a more usable form. As it moves, it loses 1 carbon dioxide molecule and then a few electrons to NAD+, which then becomes NADH. We're going to need those later, so don't forget about them. What is left of pyruvate is called acetate, and it joins with coenzyme A to form acetyl-CoA. You following me?
Just in case you aren't.
So right now, we've gained 2 molecules of ATP. We have lost 2 carbon dioxide molecules, 1 per pyruvate, and now have fancy acetyl-CoAs, ripe for respiration. Up next is the citric acid cycle, which takes place well inside the mitochondrion. Hey there. In a really complex and confusing way, acetyl-CoA loses a lot of electrons to NAD+, and FAD loses 2 more carbon dioxide molecules and produces 1 ATP. So now we have 4 ATP molecules, lots of NADH and FADH2, and all 6 carbon dioxide molecules from the original glucose have been released into the atmosphere. I know what you're thinking. That seems like a lot of work for only 4 ATP molecules of energy. And that's why an organism that relies on anaerobic respiration can't have differentiated cells the same way that a human can. They just don't have enough energy to sustain a big, complex body.
So where does most of the ATP come from?
The bulk of ATP produced by aerobic respiration is created by the electron transfer chain within the inner mitochondrial membrane.
Embedded in every inner mitochondrial membrane are a whole set of channel proteins and electron acceptor proteins. Electrons from NADH and FADH2 activate these proteins, which then pump hydrogen ions across the membrane. This causes a gradient to occur across the membrane. Look at it like this. As electrons activate the proteins, more hydrogen is pumped out. So now there are more ions outside than inside. That's a gradient, a concentration difference.
The ions don't like that. They want to be evenly distributed across the membrane, but the proteins won't let them back in. Electrons are passed from protein to protein in the electron transport chain until it reaches an oxygen molecule, which is one of the most electronegative elements in the entire periodic table. Once this happens, 2 hydrogen ions bind with the oxygen to form water, which is released as a byproduct.
So now we have a lot of hydrogens on one side that want to cross over. How are they going to come back to fix the gradient? That's the job of ATP synthase. This nifty protein lets hydrogens back inside the inner membrane, but not without doing a bit of work first. ATPase utilizes the proton motive force of their movement to phosphorylate ADP to form ATP. This is called chemiosmosis. And this is much more effective than the citric acid cycle. Each individual glucose molecule produces 32 to 34 ATP molecules. Take that, citric acid cycle and fermentation. That's aerobic respiration, folks.
Now let's review.
Energy that can be used by the body is a molecule called ATP. ATP is produced by the body in a process called cellular respiration, which consists of 2 very different types. ATP can be made in anaerobic respiration, which is done without oxygen or in the presence of a mitochondria, or in aerobic respiration, which uses oxygen and occurs mostly in the mitochondria. Anaerobic respiration is mostly only used by simple organisms because it does not provide much energy, 2 to 4 ATP per glucose. Meanwhile, aerobic respiration can produce between 36 to 38 ATP per glucose. During glycolysis, glucose becomes pyruvate, which creates 2 ATP. Glycolysis occurs in both aerobic and anaerobic respiration, but the following processes only occur in aerobic respiration. The 2 pyruvate become 2 acetyl-CoAs, which releases 2 carbon dioxide and NADH. Inside the mitochondrion, acetyl-CoA releases NADH, FADH2, 4 carbon dioxide, and 2 ATP. And then, an ion gradient across the inner membrane, created by an electron transport chain powered by oxygen, allows for ATPase to phosphorylate 32 to 34 ATP molecules, producing water in the process. In short, glucose plus oxygen yields carbon dioxide, water, and 36 to 38 ATP.
Respiration is the key to human growth, development, movement, and maintenance. It is the true source of power within us all. Without it, life as we know it, from humans to trees, the tiniest microbes, couldn't exist. Well, that's all we have time for today. So join us next week as we explore the prequel to respiration in plants, photosynthesis, in episode 43, A Light Meal. Thanks for watching, and good luck on your exam.